Huh? He says don't bomb their headquarters. How come? Because the enemy general is so dumb, they want to keep him at his post, so he's not replaced by someone good. Is he really? No, not really. Huh? Then why did they think that? Politics. Yeah. Okay. April 15th, 1944. You plan and execute a large offensive. The orders go out and it gets moving. You issue further orders to take a position to unhinge the enemy. But those orders are countermanded from above simply because your superior does not like and does not trust you, resulting in the wasting of a great opportunity. You are Renya Mutaguchi. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Japanese had the Allies under siege at points in both Burma and India. The siege in India being part of the Japanese offensive there, Ichi-Go. And on the Eastern Front, the Red Army entered Romania and also began attacks to retake the Crimea. Also in that theater of the war, at Tarnopol, some 4,000 German soldiers, most of them 18-year-olds, have been under siege since March 21st. This thanks to Hitler's fortress directive, that all towns designated fortress towns must be held to the last man. They were nearly reached by a tank and supply column the 25th, but they were not given the word to evacuate, and the armor wasn't strong enough for the job. The next attempt comes now on the 11th by the 9th SS Panzer Division. On the 12th, Army Group Commander Walter Model asked Hitler for permission to have the men break out and meet the relief force. He first says no, but then says okay once the relief force is closer to the city. The 9th SS Panzer Division, as almost always the case with new SS divisions, was a splendidly outfitted aggregation of raw troops and inexperienced officers. On the morning of the 14th, Model took the tanks away from the SS division staff and put them under an army officer. The attack then carried several miles before being stopped again at the end of the day. By that time, the Tarnopol garrison was pushed into a small area on the western edge of the city and under incessant air and ground attack. On the 15th, the commanding general was killed. That night, the senior officer in the pocket gave the order to break out. 53 men reached the 4th Panzer Army line. I talked about 1st Panzer Army's breaking out of its encirclement last week, and that the breakout is completed this week. But that breakout is celebrated back in Germany as a battle victory. Yep, and that army is still in good shape after its ordeal. In fact, on the 16th, 3rd Panzer Corps, which was a big driver of the breakout, attacks across the Dniester. For his service, 1st Panzer Army Commander Hans-Valentin Hube will fly in a few days to Berchtesgaden, where Adolf Hitler will award him the diamonds to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, one of just 27 men to be so honored in the war. But Hube will die that same day when his plane crashes in the Austrian Alps. Erhard Raus will take over command of the 1st Panzer Army. Last week we saw German 8th and 6th armies pulling back in the south amidst scenes of chaos. The last German forces managed to cross the Dniester this week on the 14th, but the army group reported that the scene behind the river was reminiscent of Stalingrad. The Romanian railroads had failed completely. The troops had no clothing and no supplies. The wounded were lying in the open at the sidings. The daily ration was 200 grams of bread. But Soviet 3rd Ukrainian Front Commander Rodion Malinovsky is not pressing his advantage here so much. So 6th Army sets up a front from Dubosari down to the mouth of the Dniester. Though the Soviets do have a few bridgehead on this front, including a big one south of Tiraspol. 8th Army counterattacks this week have also stopped the Soviet spearheads west of Iași. So they, Romanian 4th Army, and blocking force Bukovina manage a line from Debosari to Târgu Neamț up to the flanks of Army Group North Ukraine. It's funny when you think about it that Army Groups South and A were redesignated Army Groups North and South Ukraine 10 days ago, when very little of Ukraine still actually remained in German hands. Malinovsky's forces liberate Odessa the 10th, so he's now taken all of the main Black Sea ports along this coast and pulls up in a broad front on the lower Dniester, ready for a drive into Moldova and Romania, in lockstep with Ivan Konyev's 2nd Ukrainian front around Dubosari. On the 12th, Malinovsky's men occupied Tiraspol. Now, at the end of last week, the Soviets began attacks on the Axis forces holding the Crimea. Already this week, on the 9th, the Romanian 10th Division collapses. So German commander Erwin Janicke pulls his 17th Army forces back to the base of the isthmus, right? Army Group South Ukraine commander Ferdinand Schöner, who on the 7th said the defenses there could hold for a long time, tells Army Chief of Staff Kurt Zeitzler, the 9th, that they might have to retreat to Sevastopol any minute, and that Janicke should be allowed to make that call. Hitler refuses this, as you may guess he would. Zeitzler goes to Army Group Headquarters the 10th and is told that the Soviets have already pushed into the interior of the Crimea and stage 1 of the retreat has begun. This stage is just removing troops from Kerch, which the Soviets take the following day. And Hitler actually approves this. However, the 11th, he finds that the order for all units to withdraw to the Gneisenau line at Simferopol has been given, and he is furious. Furious with Janicke, who he says has lost his nerve. Schöner and company insist, though, that this was absolutely necessary, and Hitler eventually goes along with it and officially allows it, and even, if also necessary, to withdraw to Sevastopol. But that city must be held forever. Schöner does not think either the Gneisenau line or Sevastopol can be held more than a matter of weeks. And he's already even called in a shipping convoy from Romania to evacuate the service troops. On the 12th, the Soviets begin breaking through the Gneisenau line, and the 13th take Feodosia and even Simferopol. Tomorrow the 16th, the Axis rearguard will have pulled back to the Sevastopol line. They have, over the past few days, evacuated 67,000 men. The Soviet command could look with real satisfaction on the damage it had inflicted on the Ostheer's southern wing, now visibly crumpled. 10 German divisions destroyed, 8 disbanded owing to losses, 60 divisions halved in strength, and 8 left with only a remnant of their men. The 2 super soldiers, Manstein and Kleist, who for so long cast immense shadows in the east, suddenly vanished in a Hitlerian storm crowd of dismissals. Marshal Zhukov had won his protracted encounter with Field Marshal von Manstein. Okay, sure, but the Soviets are stopped on the other fronts, though they did manage to liberate Leningrad. Just now, Joseph Stalin is in talks with all of his front commanders, actually, about what they think possible and doable for near-future offensives, but concentrating on Konstantin Rokossovsky's Belarusian front. We'll see what Stalin says, maybe next week. For there is plenty more action to cover this week, like Operation Ichi-Go, Renya Mutaguchi's Japanese invasion of India. Now, British 14th Army Commander Bill Slim thinks the Japanese are aiming for Dimapur, but they are not, even though taking that would wreck the entire Allied position in Burma. When Slim realizes they just want to take Kohima and have sent a full division to do just that, he apparently asks the RAF to not bomb Kotugo Seto, 31st Division Commander's headquarters, because he wants to keep such an idiot in power. Slim has a lot to say about Seto's incompetence, actually, but it's not really fair. More sober judgment underscores that Seto did his best with an impossible brief. The decision not just to mask Kohima and aim for Dimapur, the logical one, was ruled out because the commander-in-chief in Burma, Lieutenant General Masakazu Kawabe, did not trust Mutaguchi and suspected him, rightly, of harboring megalomaniac designs to invade India. Operation Ichi-Go had been sold to Tokyo in the first place on the basis that it was a preemptive strike to disable 14th Army and make it unable to invade Burma. In Kawabe's view, an attack on Kohima was still within the permissible ambit of a defensive strike, whereas an attack on Dimapur could only be considered as a genuine offensive against Assam and India. There's more at play here too. Seto was not involved in the planning for Ichi-Go, doesn't really believe in the success of the mission, and has even told his staff that they may all starve to death, since Mutaguchi's logistical plan is that they'll capture enough supplies to survive, since they can't bring them on the jungle tracks in quantity. Also, Mutaguchi and Seto really don't like each other and come from very divergent ideological backgrounds. In our Between Two Wars series, we covered the political weirdness in Japan in the 30s, and there will be a link to that at the end. But as for these two, Mutaguchi was part of the Imperial Way faction in the army, strongly anti-communist, very much proto-fascist, and willing to assassinate any politicians or businessmen who stood in their way. Saito was among the Control faction, who stressed cooperation and collaboration with politicians and businessmen. Saito does not want to sacrifice his men to Mutaguchi's dreams of power. Sato's 31st Division has Kohima isolated and under siege though, and after fierce hand-to-hand combat all this week, has reduced the British position to a single hill. But already at the end of last week on the 8th, Mutaguchi ordered him to continue to Dimapur. So he sent some of his force along the track from Marema to Bokhajan. Thing is, Mutaguchi's order is copied to Burma Area Army Headquarters in Rangoon, where Kawabe, who has anticipated something like this, countermands the order. So on the 9th, those men are marching back the way they came. What might have happened if Saito had turned a Nelsonian blind eye to Kawabe's order, or if he had delayed its official receipt for another 24 hours? Saito was apparently happy to obey Kawabe and withdraw to Kohima, partly because his deep-seated animosity towards Mutaguchi led him to assume the army commander's demands were motivated solely by visions of military glory. Sato's hatred of Mutaguchi blinded him to the strategic possibilities offered by continuing his offensive through to Dimapur, and lost for the Japanese a crucial opportunity for victory in 1944. Still, the day-to-day grind is seriously taking its toll on the besieged. They have not just mounting casualties and mounting numbers of dead bodies rotting in the open, but they have a mounting supply crisis. They can't really even be supplied by air since the land area they hold is too small. Most of the attempts result in the supplies being dropped into Japanese hands. 3 entire plane loads the 13th alone, including mortar rounds that were promptly fired on the British. Every night the Japanese attack, and every night sees vicious hand-to-hand fighting over the hills and ridges, even a 5-day fight over the tennis courts of the deputy commissioner. Dead bodies lay everywhere, and the stench of corpses mingled with that of human feces and the smell of acrid cordite to produce an unspeakable, noisome fetor. The wounded fared especially badly, with men dying in agony. Not surprisingly, many of those wounded, but not mortally, lost the will to live when they were abandoned in the open in such conditions. There was no way to evacuate the wounded. But where is their relief? Well, parts of the 2nd Division began arriving in Dimapur as the month began, hastily diverted from Chittagong. But it isn't until the 11th that it is complete. The British have not really recognized how desperate things are for the men on Kohima Ridge. So it's a few days before the vanguard even heads into the Naga Hills. They do engage the Japanese at Zubza the 14th and break the roadblock, but by today, they still have not reached 161st Brigade headquarters. As for the fighting to the south at Imphal, the 6 spokes of a wheel, as I mentioned last week, how Slim sees it. The 49th Indian Brigade has a defensive position near Torbung, along the road south to Tidim, right before the road leaves the Imphal Valley and hits the hills. On the 9th, they are attacked by the Japanese. The 49th pulls back, but worries that they might be outflanked. Well, the 10th, 17th Indian Division takes charge over the Tidim Road defense, bringing David Mackenzie's 32nd Indian Brigade under its command. Mackenzie does some recon and then decides to move his main defense up to Bishanpur. It's got the hills to the west, it's got the lake to the east, and it also defends the track to Silchar in Assam, which is the only other road from here to the rest of India other than the Kohima Road that the Japanese have cut. You can bet that the Japanese are interested in this road as well. And the night of the 14th, they blow up a bridge on the track, cutting off that approach to Imphal. But you know, Japanese 33rd Division has as their main objective cutting off and destroying 17th Indian Division. And this they have failed to do, taking casualties in the thousands in the process. The key again here is the flying in of supplies by the Allies, which the Japanese do not have an answer to. Nor do they have an answer to strafing and bombing runs on their infantry, who don't have heavy or anti-tank weapons either, since they couldn't carry them through the jungle. The forward defense position along the Tamu Road is by now the Shinnan Saddle. Yamamoto Force took what they call Mejima Hill, and the British call Nippon Hill, back March 26, but could not advance further. On the 11th, the 80th Indian Brigade tries to retake it after an air and artillery strike. They think that nothing can survive this, but they are mistaken, for when they advance, they have to fight the enemy at close quarters. They do take the hill. What was witnessed on Nippon Hill was to be repeated on many occasions around Imphal. Japanese defensive positions would be subjected to intense bombardments, which it was hard to imagine anyone surviving. And yet, time and again, the Japanese would emerge out of the targeted positions and counterattack. This after being buried for hours or even days, usually without recourse to food or water. This is not just a testament to their hardiness, but at places like Nippon Hill, they managed to quickly dig a pretty extensive network of underground tunnels and holes that allow them to withstand bombardments. They are also tenacious, since tomorrow they themselves will retake Nippon Hill. The positions they occupied last week on the Massif of Nungshigun, they do not hold this week though. The British drive them away the 13th. This was a major threat actually, since 4th Corps headquarters are just like 5 kilometers or so away. So all force was brought to bear, and 5th Indian Division used artillery, infantry, airstrikes, and even armor up the slopes to achieve this. The bold use of tanks sealed the fate of the Japanese here. Indeed, among the chief reasons for 15th Division's ineffectiveness at Imphal was that it had not expected to encounter tanks. But these attacks in India are not the only attacks the Japanese have in mind. In fact, they are just on the precipice of launching the largest invasion in Japanese history, Operation Ichi-Go, to destroy the enemy air bases in China and create a corridor of communication the length of the country by seizing the railways. Okay, last year in August, Joichiro Sanada, head of the Japanese operations section, produced a 5-year long-range strategic plan. These studies demonstrated that there was no prospect of winning the war. In the event the situation in the Pacific deteriorated still further and maritime links were cut between Japan and Southeast Asia, Japan had to secure an adequate foothold on the Chinese mainland. The strategic concept was to fight a long and drawn-out war by forging a direct link with Japanese forces in Southeast Asia. Towards this end, Japan had to open and secure a north-south route through China. When Takashiro Hattori is reappointed chief of operations a couple months later, he begins to really push for a China clearing operation. He thinks that Japan can halt the enemy in the Pacific, and then establishing an overland corridor through China will allow a major Pacific counteroffensive in 1946. Also, American planes and subs are sabotaging transport in the East China Sea, which threatens Japan's link with Southeast Asia, and Hattori gets asked by Hajime Sugiyama, chief of staff, to look into the possibilities of hitting American air bases in Southeast China. A big air attack on Taiwan in November sort of seals the deal, foreshadowing attacks on the home islands, and plans are drawn up for an offensive to take the Beijing-Hankou, Hankou-Guangzhou, and Guangxi-Hunan railways, and destroy the American air bases along these railways, eliminating the aerial threat to Japan. However, Hideki Tojo takes over as chief of staff in March, and he wants it to be just destroying the air bases and no other diversions. The operations section, however, argued that since an imperial command had already been issued, time was running out, and it decided to launch the offensive. Subsequent operational guidance would take Tojo's views into account. In this manner, the operation's objectives were not consolidated into a unified objective as directed by Tojo. More about this as the weeks and the offensive unfold. It begins in a matter of days. And with that foreshadowing, I shall end this week of the war. A week of advances in the Crimea, advances near the Dniester, a desperate siege at Kohima, and some give and take at Imphal. Oh, and on the 10th, American bombers begin attacks on the German shore batteries on the coast of Normandy. This is in preparation for the Allies' cross-channel invasion just a couple months away. Thing is, they also bomb between Rouen and Dunkirk because they want the Germans to think they're going to land at Pas de Calais. In fact, the order is that for every battery they bomb in the actual assault area, 2 others outside it must be bombed to maintain deception. So, Stalin is making plans for gigantic offensives, even while his men are breaking into Romania. The Japanese are about to launch their biggest offensive in their history. The Allies plan a massive invasion of France. In Italy, they're regrouping to make more massive efforts to reach Rome. American command has its big plans for the Marianas and the Philippines. I remember when I covered the First World War week by week, that 1916 was called the Year of Battles. As things are starting to develop, 1944 might take that title. I have a special thank you today. Dirk Bergdorf and his team of independent researchers at the National Archives in Washington, the NARA guys, National Archives and Records. He's done us a great service by helping us with map research and all, so I thought I'd shout from the rooftops how awesome they are. Their website is AAA Research, and there should be a link in the pinned comment below. They specialize in American and German military documents, well, of a variety of types, like unit diaries, maps, aerial photography, well, all sorts of stuff. And they also help individuals with researching family history. So thanks again, Dirk. And if you want to learn more about the Japanese political and military situation in the 1930s, you can click here for that Between Two Wars episode, and you can check that out, and it's really good. It's actually super interesting and really confusing, right? Really, that was a really good one. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.